Hi everyone. As an introduction to our study, in this video I'm going to discuss some fundamental concepts necessary to the study of the structure of English sentences. And this is the outline. First, I'm going to discuss words, phrases, and sentences. Then we are going to have a look at sentence types according to communicative functions, plurality, number of clauses, and arrangement of words. And finally, I'm going to provide an overview of our study. So let's start with words. Word seems to be a term most people are familiar with. We actually use the term word to refer to both a word form and a lexeme. One lexeme may have more than one word form. For example, take is a lexeme which has 5 word forms: take, takes, taking, took, and taken. Big is a lexeme which has 3 word forms: big, bigger, and biggest. And trip is a lexeme which has 2 word forms: trip and trips. Usually, words in a language are classified according to their semantic and syntactic properties. Word classes include noun, pronoun, verb, adjective, adverb, and preposition. For example, trip and London are nouns. I and me are pronouns. Took and was are verbs. Good and awful are adjectives. Very and hardly are adverbs. And to and from are prepositions. Now let's have a look at phrases. A phrase may consist of one or more than one word. Phrasal categories include noun phrase, verb phrase, adjective phrase, adverb phrase, and preposition phrase. For example, I, it, London, a trip to London, and the weather are noun phrases. Took a trip to London and was a very good trip are verb phrases. Good and very good are adjective phrases. Very and hardly are adverb phrases. To London and from Thailand are preposition phrases. Having discussed words and phrases, we are now ready to discuss sentences. A sentence consists of a subject and a predicate. Do you know what is the subject and predicate of these sentences? So, I took a trip to London is a sentence where the subject is the NP, I, and the predicate is the VP, took a trip to London. Similarly, it was a very good trip is a sentence where the subject is the NP, it, and the predicate is the VP, was a very good trip. Sentences can be classified in several ways. Here, we are going to have a look at sentence types according to communicative functions, plurality, number of clauses, and arrangement of words. First, based on communicative function, there are 4 types of sentences: declarative, interrogative, imperative, and exclamative. On the other hand, by plurality, there are 2 types: positive and negative. According to number of clauses, however, there are 3 types: simple, compound, and complex. And finally, by arrangement of words, there are 2 types: basic word order and rearrangement of words. Now let's take a closer look at the sentence types. First, let's look at sentence types according to communicative function. Using language to communicate, we are making statements, asking questions, issuing commands, and sometimes uttering exclamations. Sentences that we use differ according to their functions. Basically, we use declaratives for making statements, interrogatives for asking questions, imperatives for issuing commands, and exclamative for uttering exclamations. Here are some examples. So sentences like I took a trip to London and I enjoyed the trip are declaratives. Sentences like did you take a trip to London? What did you like most are interrogatives. And sentences like tell me about your trip, show me the pictures are imperatives. Finally, what a long trip it was, how excited I was are exclamatives. In addition to communicative functions, plurality can also be used as a criterion for sentence classification. By plurality, there are two types of sentences, positive and negative. Sentences like I took a trip to London, I often go on a business trip are positive sentences. And sentences like I didn't take a trip to London, I hardly go on a business trip are negative sentences. Next, let's look at sentence types according to number of clauses. But first, let's define clause. Like a sentence, a clause consists of a subject and a predicate. There are two kinds of clause, independent and dependent. An independent clause can stand alone as a sentence. But a dependent clause cannot stand alone as a sentence. A sentence consisting of one independent clause is a simple sentence. A sentence consisting of more than one independent clause is a compound sentence. And a sentence consisting of one independent clause and at least one dependent clause is a complex sentence. Let's first focus on a simple sentence like I took a trip to London. As you can see in this diagram, in the sentence I took a trip to London, there is only one clause where the subject is the NP I and the predicate is the VP took a trip to London. And these are more examples of simple sentences. So sentence A, I took a trip to London. Sentence B, I enjoyed a trip to London. Sentence C, my host family has a big house. And sentence D, my host family gave me this shirt. These sentences are all simple sentences. Having discussed simple sentences, now let's look at compound sentences. A compound sentence consists of more than one independent clause. For example, I took a trip to London and I loved it. As illustrated here in this diagram, the first clause is I took a trip to London, and the second clause is I loved it. Both of them are independent clauses. So, in the same way as sentence A, sentence B is also a compound sentence. Sentence B consists of two independent clauses. My host family has a big house, and it is very far from the subway. Both of the clauses are independent clauses. Having discussed simple and compound sentences, let's now look at complex sentences. A complex sentence consists of one independent clause and at least one dependent clause. For example, I enjoyed the trip although the weather was awful. In this sentence, I enjoyed the trip is an independent clause, but although the weather was awful is a dependent clause. So in the same way as sentence A, sentence B is also a complex sentence. In sentence B, the first clause, which is my host family had given me this shirt, is an independent clause. But the second clause, which is before I left for Thailand, is a dependent clause. Now let's get back to sentence types. By arrangement of words, there are two types of sentences: basic word order and rearrangement of words. Sentences like I took a trip to London and I hardly go on a business trip are sentences in basic word order. On the other hand, sentences like the trip to London I took and hardly do I go on a business trip are sentences with rearrangement of words. Having discussed the fundamental concepts, let's now have a look at how we are going to proceed with our study. Well, at this point, we finished chapter 1, which is an introduction. Next, we are going to start part 1 of the study, which consists of 4 chapters. In these 4 chapters, we are going to investigate into words, phrases, basic sentence elements, and sentence types. Then in part 2, we are going to discuss coordination, subordination with finite clauses, subordination with non-finite clauses, and other sentence patterns. I hope you find this video helpful, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!